The day began before the sun had even touched the ridge, and the cold felt sharper than usual, the kind that crawled through a man's coat and settled heavy in his bones. He walked along the dirt road with slow steps, boots dragging a little as though each one carried a memory he didn't want to revisit. Folks around town knew he hadn't been himself for a long time. Losing too much too fast had worn him down in ways no one could fully see. His farm had once been alive with sound and motion, but now it stood quiet, holding more shadows than hope. Yet something pushed him out of bed that morning and led him toward the horse auction. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was the thin spark that comes when a man is down to his last choices. He kept his hands deep in his coat pockets as he reached the crowded yard. The auction grounds were already buzzing with voices, boots thumping against wooden planks, and the restless movements of animals that didn't understand why they were there. Buyers circled the pens, eyeing horses with sharp judgment. Most had no time for sympathy. They wanted strong legs, smooth coats, good temper, and a future that looked useful. No one looked twice at the pens holding worn-out or troubled animals, and if they did, it was only to shake their heads and move on. He stood near the back, away from the louder crowds. He didn't plan on buying anything. He barely had enough coins for the week, let alone enough to take home a horse. But he stayed anyway, letting the noise wash over him while his mind drifted between past and present. There was something about watching the horses that reminded him of better days, days when he still believed he could turn things around. Now he wasn't so sure. A sudden commotion near the far pen caught his attention. A few people laughed under their breath, and someone muttered that the auction should skip that one. He narrowed his eyes, trying to see what had sparked the reaction. The pen held a single stallion, tall but thin, coat dull and tangled. The animal shifted with a wary stubbornness, ears pinned back as if refusing the world. There were marks along his sides, not fresh but old enough to show a history that wasn't kind. Most folks wouldn't come near a horse like that. He was the sort buyers avoided, knowing he wouldn't fetch anything on the market. But the man felt something stir inside him. He wasn't sure if it was pity or recognition. Broken things had a way of calling out to each other. He watched the stallion lower his head and stand there quietly, not fighting, not showing spirit, just existing in a tired shell. The auction runner shook his head as he climbed the platform, acting like he'd rather skip the sale entirely. But rules were rules, and every animal had to go through the ring. The stallion was led forward with little ceremony. No one stepped closer. The auction runner cleared his throat and called out the starting bid, low enough to sound like an apology. The crowd stayed still. The man felt an ache build inside him, a mix of helplessness and something else he didn't dare name. He didn't know why he couldn't look away. The stallion seemed to carry the same heaviness he had carried for years. Something in those eyes mirrored his own silent fights. The auction runner called out the price again, voice thinner now. Still, no one moved. Someone joked that the horse should be given away for free. Another said he'd be lucky to serve as pasture decoration. The man felt his fists clench inside his coat. He knew better than to rise to any challenge, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that leaving the stallion behind would only add one more regret to the pile already weighing on him. He stared at the coins in his pocket. They weren't enough, not for feed, not for repairs, not even for comfort. But they were all he had left, and something inside him whispered that using them here might be the only choice that still meant something. Before he could talk himself out of it, he raised his hand. The auction runner blinked at him with surprise. A few heads turned. One man whispered that the buyer must be desperate or foolish. The bid stood alone, no other hands rising. The auction runner hesitated, then slammed the gavel down. The stallion was his. A strange mix of pride and dread washed through him. He had just bought a horse everyone else considered useless. He had spent the last bit of money he had on an animal that might bring more trouble than help. Yet, as he approached the stallion, he felt an unexpected calm settle in. The horse watched him with dark, tired eyes, not hostile but cautious, as if waiting to see if this man would hurt or heal. He reached out slowly. The stallion didn't move. His coat felt coarse beneath the man's fingers, but there was warmth there, a steady heartbeat still fighting in its own quiet way. The moment felt strangely important, though he couldn't explain why. It was as if he and the stallion shared an unspoken understanding, the kind that comes when two beings have weathered more storms than they care to remember. He led the horse away from the auction yard, ignoring the whispers behind him. Some folks shook their heads, others scoffed, but he kept walking, placing one foot ahead of the other with the same stubborn determination the stallion seemed to carry. They moved together through the dust, two weary souls unsure of their future but tied together now by a choice he could not take back. On the road home, he noticed the stallion lifting his head a little higher. Maybe it was the open air or simply the relief of being away from the noise. Either way, the horse seemed to take in the world again piece by piece. The man wondered what the animal had been through and why he had ended up in such a rough state. He also wondered if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. He had nothing left to fall back on. Bringing home a troubled stallion felt like reaching into a dark room, hoping to find a door but expecting a wall. By the time they reached the edge of his land, the sun had begun to dip low, turning the fields gold while the shadows grew long. The farm looked tired like everything else in his life, its fences leaning, the barn roof sagging. The stallion halted for a moment, staring out at the land as though searching for something familiar. The man tightened his grip on the rope, unsure if the horse would bolt. But instead, the stallion took a hesitant step forward, accepting this quiet place as his new home. As he led the horse into the barn, he noticed a small cut along the stallion's shoulder. It looked recent, as though the animal had brushed against something sharp not long ago. He crouched down to clean it, and while doing so, he saw something even stranger. Hidden beneath the tangled mane was a faint mark, almost like an old brand, but not one he recognized. It was faded and narrow, shaped more like a symbol than a ranch marking. He ran his thumb over it, frowning. The horse shifted uneasily but didn't pull away. A chill crept up his spine. Something about that mark felt out of place, like a secret carved into the horse's past. He stepped back slowly and studied the stallion again, feeling a question rise that he didn't know how to answer. The tired animal he bought for a handful of coins suddenly seemed far more complicated than the auction had made him appear. For the first time all day, the man felt something spark inside him. Not fear, not hope, something in between. He didn't know it yet, but the horse standing in his barn wasn't just another burden added to his life. The mark, the cut, the strange stillness in those dark eyes, all of it hinted at a story much larger than his own. And as the wind pushed through the open doorway, carrying the scent of night and the quiet rustle of leaves, he realized something unsettling. This stallion hadn't simply appeared at the auction by chance. He had been placed there. And by buying him, the man had stepped into the final chance he never knew he was being given. He brought the stallion home under a sky that looked washed out, the kind of sky that held more silence than color. The wheels of his wagon bumped along the dirt road, and the stallion shifted every so often, testing the rope as if deciding whether to trust the man who had bought him. The farmer kept his eyes ahead, hands steady on the reins. He told himself it was just another task on another day, but his breath felt strange in his chest. Something about the animal weighed on him. He could not say if it was hope or worry or some knot of both. His farm sat between the tall grass fields and a thin stream that had grown weaker in recent seasons. The house stood with a lean to one side, though he had repaired the same corner more than once. The barn carried old scars too, patched in a way that suggested someone trying to hold on to more than wood and nails. When he pulled into the yard, the stallion lifted his head, ears turning toward the sound of distant wind sweeping over the fields. He led the animal into the barn, guiding him past the empty stalls. He had lost horses before, some to age, some to sickness, and one to a storm that took down part of his old stable. Every loss had chipped something inside him, but this stallion made him feel a small tug he had not felt in a long time. The horse stepped into his new stall, calm for a moment, then restless again. The farmer closed the gate and leaned against the wood, studying the creature. The stallion had a scar that ran along his flank, the kind that came from a rough life or maybe a frightened moment that left its mark. His coat was dull and his ribs showed faintly. He looked like a creature who had gone too long without being understood. The farmer knew what that felt like. He gave the stallion water and set some feed by the trough. The horse sniffed it, then backed away as if unsure of anything placed before him. The farmer spoke softly, offering no demands, only presence. He had learned that living things in pain did not respond well to force. They needed room to breathe, room to find their way. Through the open barn doors he watched the wind bend the fields. Life had become a long trail of days, each one slipping into the next. Work came and went, seasons turned, and his heart felt old even when his body was not. The farm had been his father's dream, then his own burden, but now it was something he could not name. He stayed because he could not imagine leaving. He worked because he did not know what life would be without work. He endured because there was nothing else to do. The stallion shifted again, and the farmer returned to his side. Up close, the animal's eyes were deep and steady, older than they should have been. He had seen many animals in his life, but never eyes that looked as if they were carrying a story too heavy to speak. The stallion watched him with a silence that felt deliberate. The first night passed with the horse pacing the stall, and the farmer lying awake, listening to each shuffle of hooves. When dawn came, he rose before the sun. He had always done so, not because he wanted to, but because the farm asked for it. He walked into the barn with a lantern and found the stallion standing still, head bowed slightly as if waiting for something he had never been given. The farmer reached out a hand, slow and careful. The stallion tensed, then relaxed just enough for the man to touch his neck. There was a warmth there that surprised him. He expected the coldness of an animal used to fear. Instead, he felt a spark of trust, faint yet present. He let his hand rest a moment longer, then pulled away before the stallion felt crowded. Outside, the sun lifted over the edge of the fields, spreading light across the land. The farmer stood by the barn door, watching the colors grow. He tried to imagine how this day might go, how the next weeks might unfold. He wondered if he had made a mistake buying the animal. He wondered if the auctioneer had laughed after he left. Most folks there would have seen the horse as a waste of money. Yet something about the stallion made him believe there was more beneath the roughness. The days that followed passed with a mix of uncertainty and small progress. The stallion drank more water, ate a little more feed, and no longer turned away when the farmer approached. Trouble still showed in the tension of his muscles, but it was a different kind of trouble, like a man learning to trust again after losing too much. The farmer found himself watching the horse more than he expected. He studied the way the stallion's ears moved, how he breathed when the wind changed direction, how he stepped around the stall with caution instead of fear. The man could not explain why these small details mattered. Maybe it was because life had become dull around the edges, and noticing something new felt like opening a window in a dusty room. He began letting the stallion out into the fenced pasture during the afternoons. The horse moved with stiffness at first, then loosened as he explored the ground. His gait was uneven, and it was clear he had been mishandled or overworked long before coming to the auction yard. Still, there was something in the way he lifted his head toward the distance that hinted at strength buried beneath hardship. Neighbors passed by occasionally, offering polite greetings with a tone that held mild curiosity and quiet judgment. They wondered why a man already worn by life would take on a creature like that. The farmer answered their questions with short replies, guarding his reasons even though he could barely explain them to himself. It was not pride that kept him quiet. It was a feeling that the stallion's story was meant to unfold without outside eyes shaping it. One late afternoon, as the sun lowered into a warm glow, the stallion suddenly stopped grazing. His ears pricked forward and he stared toward the far side of the property. The farmer followed his gaze but saw nothing more than swaying grass and the faint line of the hills. The horse's body stiffened and a shiver passed through him. The farmer stepped closer, speaking in a calm tone, but the stallion did not move. His attention remained locked on whatever he sensed. The wind shifted. A soft chill drifted through the air, strange for the season. The farmer felt it too, though he could not explain what was different about it. The stallion took a slow step backward, then another. His breath came faster, but he did not break into a run. It was as if he knew something out there demanded caution rather than panic. The farmer stood beside him, unsure if he should lead the horse back to the barn or let him stay. The stallion's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, and the man could not shake the feeling that the animal had recognized something unseen by him. A memory, a sound, a presence. The moment lingered, heavy in the air. The stallion lowered his head slightly, not in fear but in recognition. The farmer felt a sudden tightness in his chest, not from worry but from something quieter and harder to define. He had thought he bought a useless horse. Now he wondered if he had brought home a creature with a past that might change the path of his own life in ways he could not yet imagine. Before he could lead the stallion back, the wind carried a faint echo across the land, something that made the horse's ears twitch again. The sound faded before the farmer could place it. He felt a pull inside him, a mix of dread and curiosity. The stallion turned toward him as if waiting to see what the man would do next. And in that quiet moment, the farmer realized the tension of the past days had only been the beginning. Whatever lay ahead had already begun to stir, and both he and the stallion were caught in its path. Would you like me to continue the next part at the same length and style? The days that followed carried a strange weight, as if the land itself sensed something shifting beneath the surface. The stallion's behavior grew more unusual, though not in a wild or dangerous way. He spent long stretches standing near the far fence, staring toward the hills with a focus that made the farmer uneasy. The horse ate well, drank plenty, and moved with more strength than before, yet his attention kept drifting back to that distant horizon. The farmer tried to dismiss it, telling himself animals were just animals, reacting to sounds he could not hear or sense hidden in the wind. Still, the feeling lingered. The farm settled into its usual rhythm, but the man moved through it with a new awareness. The stallion had become part of his routine in a way he had not expected. He checked on him before tending to the fields, brushed his coat before repairing fences, and lingered longer at feeding time, watching for signs that might explain the horse's odd behavior. His hands worked, but his mind often drifted. Neighbors stopped by more often than usual. Some came out of curiosity, others out of concern. Folks had plenty of opinions about what the farmer should or should not do, and most believed he had taken on more trouble than he needed. One man, older and known for speaking bluntly, leaned against the fence one morning and watched the stallion pacing. He said the horse had the look of something that had been pushed too far, maybe broken in a way that never healed right. The farmer listened without arguing. He knew the stallion had a past he might never uncover, but he also sensed that dismissing the animal too quickly would be a mistake. One morning, a woman from a neighboring farm stopped by with a basket of bread. She had known the farmer for years, though they rarely talked beyond simple greetings. She seemed uneasy as she approached the barn. She mentioned hearing strange sounds at night, drifting across the fields from the hills. Low hums, she said, almost like distant calls. The farmer tried to laugh it off, but her expression did not change. She said she had noticed the stallion staring toward the hills during the evenings, and something in his posture made her worry. She left the basket on a stool near the barn door and told him to keep an eye on the horse. There was something about her voice that stayed with him long after she walked away. The farm chores piled up as the season moved forward. Repairs, planting, hauling, and maintenance filled every hour. Yet the farmer found himself pulled between the work and the mystery shaping around the stallion. He felt as if he were standing at the edge of something unseen, a place where ordinary life blurred with something deeper. The tension grew in ways he could not quite explain. It was not fear, not exactly. It was more like the quiet before a storm that had not yet shown its clouds. One late afternoon, while working near the stream, the farmer heard the stallion release a sharp sound from the pasture. Not a cry of pain or anger, but a call filled with urgency. The man dropped his tools and ran. When he reached the fence, the stallion stood perfectly still, muscles tight and tail lifted. His eyes were fixed on the hills again. The wind carried a faint shift in temperature, a coolness that touched the farmer's arms. He stepped closer to the horse, speaking softly, trying to calm whatever stirred inside the animal. The stallion did not move. His ears twitched in perfect sync with the breeze, as if listening to something the farmer could not hear. Then, without warning, the horse stepped forward, pressing his chest gently against the farmer's shoulder. The contact felt intentional, not aggression, not fear. It was as if the horse wanted him to understand something he could not express. The moment passed when the wind changed again. The stallion lowered his head and walked away, leaving the farmer standing alone near the fence, the grass quiet beneath his boots. That night he could not sleep. The house creaked in its usual ways, and the distant sounds of the farm settled into familiar rhythms. Yet his mind replayed the stallion's strange behavior over and over. He began to think about the auction again, about how the horse had been brought in last, how the handlers had avoided eye contact, how little information had been shared. He wondered what kind of life the animal had endured before that moment, what had shaped the scars on his flank, why he carried a presence that felt heavier than any creature he had owned before. As the days turned warmer, the stallion's strength returned. His coat took on more shine, and his movements grew smoother. He trotted across the pasture with a mix of power and caution. The farmer felt proud of the progress, yet unsettled by the way the horse continued to stare at the hills every evening. There seemed to be a connection between the stallion and something far beyond the boundaries of the farm, something calling to him. The man decided to explore the far field one morning, moving beyond the fence line to the edge of his property. He had walked that land countless times, yet this time he paid closer attention. He studied the ground, the grass, the shift of the wind. Nothing looked out of place, but he felt watched. Not by a person, but by the land itself. When he returned, the stallion stood waiting at the fence, as if aware of his absence. Another subplot began to unfold through interactions with a traveling trader who visited the region every few months. The trader arrived with goods packed on an aging wagon, offering dried foods, tools, and stories from distant towns. When he saw the stallion, his eyes widened for a moment. He asked where the farmer had bought the horse. When the man mentioned the auction, the trader nodded slowly, his expression cautious. The trader mentioned hearing talk of a group that had raised horses for hard labor and long-distance drives across rough terrain. Some animals had been pushed too far, treated poorly, then sold off quietly when they became too difficult to manage. He did not confirm the stallion came from such a place, but his tone hinted at a troubling past. The farmer tried to ask more, but the trader grew guarded and changed the subject. Before leaving, he told the farmer to take care of the horse and be patient. Some animals carried memories as sharp as knives. The conversation lingered in the farmer's thoughts. It explained some things, perhaps, but not everything. The stallion's reactions were not just instinctive responses to trauma. There was something more thoughtful in his behavior, something that suggested awareness beyond simple fear. Tension built further when a series of disruptions started happening around the farm. One night, the chickens became restless, stirring in their little house without clear cause. Another evening, the stream near the field carried a strange pattern of ripples, as if disturbed by something beneath the surface. The farmer checked for animals or broken branches but found nothing. These moments unsettled him, because they happened around the same time the stallion grew tense. The more he paid attention, the more connections he noticed. The horse reacted before each small disturbance, raising his head or shifting his weight. The farmer realized the stallion sensed things long before he did, as if he were tuned to something deeper in the land. It was not a threat in the traditional sense. It was more like the return of something unresolved. The farmer's own past began stirring too. Memories he had pushed aside resurfaced, losses he had endured, choices he had avoided. He had spent years burying those pieces of himself under work and routine. The stallion, without meaning to, had stirred them up. The man found himself thinking more about the life he had hoped for and the one he had ended up with. He wondered if the horse felt the same weight in his own way. One evening, as dusk settled, a faint sound drifted across the land again. The stallion lifted his head sharply, nostrils flaring. The farmer stood beside him, gripping the fence. The sound carried across the fields like a distant call, too faint to understand but strong enough to stir something inside both man and animal. The horse took a step forward, muscles tight. The farmer felt a pull inside his chest, a strange recognition he could not explain. Then the sound stopped, leaving the land silent. The stallion exhaled and lowered his head, but the tension remained. The farmer realized whatever was drawing near, whatever history or force or memory had been circling them, had not revealed itself yet. Something was coming. Something neither of them could escape. and the story had only begun shaping its true conflict. The days grew heavier as the farmer tried to keep up with the work around the property, but something in the air made each task feel slower. The stallion had settled into a routine, yet the quiet tension that surrounded him never eased. When the farmer stepped outside each morning, the horse was already awake, standing in the pasture as if he had not slept. He watched the hills with the same sharp attention that had unnerved the farmer from the start. The man began to sense that whatever was drawing near was no longer far away. It was creeping closer, carried through faint sounds, shivers in the earth, and the strange pull that kept weaving between him and the stallion. One morning, as he was stacking hay near the barn, the farmer heard the sound again. This time it was stronger, carried on a breeze that chilled the back of his neck. He froze. The stallion lifted his head from the water trough at the exact same moment. The farmer stepped outside the barn, letting the wind brush against his coat. The sound was not a howl or a whistle. It was something deeper, like a distant horn that barely reached his ears. It faded quickly, but not before settling a new layer of unease in his chest. Later that afternoon, a neighbor came to check on him. The man looked unsettled and mentioned hearing strange noises too, saying the cattle had been restless for days. He asked if the farmer had noticed anything unusual. The farmer hesitated, unsure how much to share. He simply nodded and mentioned the stallion had been acting on edge. The neighbor glanced toward the pasture and narrowed his eyes. He whispered that sometimes animals sensed things long before people did. Something about his voice hinted that he knew more than he wanted to say. When he left, he kept glancing over his shoulder as if expecting something to step out from behind the barn. The stallion's behavior shifted again as the days passed. He grew more alert, pacing the fence line during the evenings and pushing his muzzle against the gate as if urging the farmer to open it. The farmer tried to calm him with gentle words and slow strokes along his neck, but it only worked for a moment. The horse would settle, then lift his head again, drawn toward the hills. The farmer started to worry that the stallion might try to break free. He reinforced the fence and checked the latches twice a day, though he hated the idea of keeping the animal locked in. It felt wrong, but he could not risk losing him to whatever was pulling him away. One night, the farmer woke to a thud outside his window. He sat up, heart pounding. When he stepped onto the porch, the moonlight revealed the stallion standing near the gate, breathing hard. The gate held, but the wood bore a fresh mark. The horse had tried to push through. The farmer approached slowly, murmuring softly so he would not startle him. The stallion pressed his head to the man's chest, a gesture that felt desperate. The farmer placed his hand against the horse's jaw, sensing the heat beneath his skin. The air around them felt charged, as if the night held something waiting just beyond sight. The farmer barely slept after that. Each noise outside the house pulled him from bed. He kept a lantern near the window and listened for any shift in the wind. During those long nights he realized the fear eating at him was not only for himself. It was for the stallion. The animal carried something inside him, some history or burden the farmer could not understand. He began to suspect that whatever was approaching had to do with the horse's past, and that the stallion knew it better than anyone. Another subplot unfolded when the traveling trader returned earlier than expected. His wagon was dusty, and his face looked drawn from a long journey. He asked to speak privately. They stood near the barn while the stallion watched from the pasture. The trader spoke in a low voice, saying he had learned more about the group that once owned horses like the stallion. He mentioned harsh training methods, long forced drives, and a particular horse that had escaped during a storm. Rumor claimed the horse had led others to break free, and that the handlers had searched for months, hoping to reclaim what they believed they had rights to. The farmer asked what the stallion had to do with all that. The trader hesitated, then said the animal carried the same mark on his flank described in the stories. The farmer felt his stomach tighten. If the rumors were true, someone might come looking for the stallion. Worse, the horse might sense they were coming. The trader warned him to be careful and to trust the stallion's instincts, even if they seemed strange. Before leaving, the trader placed a hand on the farmer's shoulder, saying there were times when a person had to choose whether to hold on or let go. Those words echoed in the farmer's mind long after the wagon rolled away. The tension grew stronger, pressing on him each day. The stallion became more restless, turning in circles when the wind came from the hills, snorting and pawing at the ground. The farmer felt helpless watching him. He wanted to protect the horse, yet he did not know what he was protecting him from. He felt as though he were standing between the stallion and something impossible to fight. One late afternoon, the sky grew darker than usual. Thick clouds rolled in with a strange swiftness, carrying a heavy scent of rain. The farmer worked to gather tools from the field before the storm arrived. The air felt sharp, filled with a stillness that made his skin prickle. When he turned toward the pasture, he saw the stallion standing completely still. His head was raised high, ears tilted forward, and his tail flicked with a nervous rhythm. The horse did not seem afraid of the storm. He seemed afraid of something else entirely. The wind picked up, carrying another faint sound across the land. This time it was louder, closer, and shaped like a low call meant to draw attention. The stallion let out a tense snort and took several steps backward. The farmer hurried toward him, but before he reached the fence, the horse reared slightly, stomping the ground. The sky thundered in the distance, but the fear in the stallion's eyes had nothing to do with the weather. The farmer finally reached the fence, pressing his hands against the top rail. The stallion moved close, trembling, not from cold but from something deeper. The farmer stroked his neck, whispering steady words. The storm wings whipped around them, but neither moved away from the other. The farmer felt the stallion's breath on his arm, warm and uneven. He knew the horse was bracing for something he expected to arrive at any moment. As the storm broke, heavy rain poured across the fields. The farmer hurried the stallion toward the barn, leading him inside. The horse entered willingly, but kept turning his head toward the open doorway. Thunder cracked overhead. The barn rattled, the wind howling against the walls, yet the stallion's focus never shifted. The farmer lit a lantern, setting it near the feed bins. Shadows danced along the wooden beams and hay rustled under their feet. The storm raged outside, but the tension inside the barn grew thicker. The stallion moved in circles, restless but not panicked. It was as if he were preparing himself, gathering every bit of strength he had left. The farmer tried to steady him, but his own hands shook. The air felt charged with something more than weather. Something was coming through the storm, hidden behind the thunder, drawn toward the barn by forces neither man nor horse could stop. A sudden crash echoed across the property, louder than thunder, shaking the barn walls. The stallion jolted, muscles tightening. The farmer grabbed the lantern and stepped toward the open doorway, heart racing. The rain blurred his vision, but he saw movement at the edge of the field, dark shapes. Too many to mistake, they moved with purpose, heading toward the barn. The stallion let out a deep, trembling cry that cut through the storm. The farmer froze, lantern flickering in his hand as those shapes drew closer. Whatever had been calling to the stallion had finally arrived, and nothing on the farm would ever be the same. The farmer stood frozen at the barn entrance, the lantern trembling in his hand as the storm poured sheets of rain across the field. The dark shapes at the far end of the property drew closer with slow, steady steps. They moved like they belonged to the storm itself, rising and fading between lightning flashes. The stallion pressed closer behind him, trembling but holding his ground as if he knew this moment had been coming all along. The farmer took a breath and stepped back inside, lifting the lantern high so its glow reached the far corners of the barn. The stallion shifted his weight, hooves scraping against the wooden floor. The farmer could feel the heat of the horse's fear, and he knew he needed to hold himself together. He walked to the barn doors and pulled them halfway closed, leaving only a narrow gap through which he could see the storm. The shapes grew larger. There were 3 of them at first, then 5, moving with the unmistakable weight of riders on horseback. The farmer's heart pounded as he realized they were not strangers to this land. They moved as if they had ridden here before, maybe long before the stallion ever arrived. Lightning lit the sky, revealing weathered men in long coats, hats pulled low, their horses soaked from the rain. The farmer felt a chill as he noticed something familiar about the way their horses carried themselves, stiff-necked and alert. These were not ordinary riders. These were the men the trader had warned him about, the ones who had searched for the stallion in the past. Their silhouettes were roughened by years of chasing shadows, and now they had followed theirs right to his barn. The farmer heard one of them call out through the storm, asking if anyone was inside. The voice was rough, but not angry, more tired than anything. The stallion reacted, nostrils flaring, stepping back until his flank brushed the stall wall. The farmer placed a hand on the horse's side and whispered calmly. He knew the stallion was expecting a fight, but he did not know if that was what awaited them. When the riders reached the barn, the leader dismounted and walked toward the doors. The farmer stepped forward, lantern held high, bracing himself. The man's face came into view, sharp but worn, the kind of expression shaped by years of loss and long travel. Rain dripped from his hat, and he removed it slowly as a sign of respect. The farmer realized this man had not come here to harm anyone. He carried exhaustion, not threat. The rider spoke quietly, saying he had been searching for a runaway stallion for years. His voice softened when he mentioned the horse by the old name he once had. The farmer did not answer, but the stallion responded with a low rumble deep in his chest, a sound that was part recognition and part warning. The man nodded gently, acknowledging that the horse had changed since he last saw him. He explained that the stallion had been part of a hard life, pushed beyond reason, and that one night he had broken free, leading others with him. The men who followed him were not coming to reclaim him in anger. They wanted to see what had become of the horse who had done what none of them thought possible. The farmer listened closely, trying to read between the man's words. He could sense the regret in the rider's voice, mixed with a kind of pride. The storm rumbled outside, but for a moment everything inside the barn fell still. The farmer stepped aside so the rider could see the stallion more clearly. The man approached slowly, stopping several feet away. The stallion's muscles tightened, ready to flee if needed. But then something unexpected happened. The horse tilted his head, studying the rider, not with fear, but with caution softened by familiarity. The rider lowered his gaze, saying softly that he was not here to take him away. He explained that the men had already accepted the loss long ago. The world had changed for them, and they knew they had no right to force the stallion back into the life he escaped. They had only come to be certain he was alive, safe, and somewhere he could breathe without fear. The farmer felt a weight lift from his chest as he realized their visit had no hidden danger. Another lightning flash revealed the other riders waiting quietly on their horses, watching the barn with solemn respect. The leader turned back to the farmer and offered a simple apology for disturbing his night. He said the storm had pushed them to shelter, and the signs they followed had led them to this place for a final closure. Before he left, he told the farmer that the stallion was lucky to have landed here. His voice cracked slightly as though surprised by the emotion rising in it. The men mounted their horses and rode back into the storm, disappearing across the fields as silently as they had arrived. The farmer watched them go until they faded behind the rain. Only then did he close the barn doors fully. When he turned to the stallion, he found the horse calmer now, breathing deeply as if a long chase had finally ended. The farmer stroked his neck, feeling the tension ease beneath his hand. For the first time, the stallion leaned into him with a quiet trust he had never shown before. As the storm slowed, the farmer let the stallion rest in the barn. He sat on a hay bale nearby, the lantern dimming as its flame thinned. His thoughts drifted through the past months, the hardships he had carried for years, and the strange bond that had formed between him and the horse. He realized the stallion's arrival had forced him to confront parts of himself he had kept buried, the fear, the loneliness, the doubt. Caring for the horse had brought life back into his days, pushing him to rise each morning with a reason stronger than habit. Over the next few weeks, the farm began to feel different. The stallion grew more settled, responding to the farmer's voice with an ease that made daily chores lighter. The neighbors noticed, too. They remarked on how the stallion had changed, calling him steadier, wiser, almost protective. The farmer felt proud, not because the townsfolk were impressed, but because he had earned the horse's trust slowly, patiently, without force. Every step of progress felt like a gift. The trader returned once more, curious about the stormy night that had rattled the whole region. When he heard the story, he shook his head in wonder, saying few animals ever outran their past so completely. He told the farmer that the stallion's escape years ago had become something of a legend among travelers, proof of strength and spirit. Now the horse had found a place where he could finally stop running. The farmer realized the trader was right. The stallion was no longer a burden or a mystery. He was part of the farm, part of the farmer's life, and part of his healing. Seasons shifted, and the bond between them deepened. The stallion helped with work in the fields, surprising the farmer with how willing he was to learn new tasks. On quiet evenings they walked the property together, the farmer talking softly while the stallion listened with gentle eyes. The man felt his life rebuild itself piece by piece. Where there had once been silence, the steady rhythm of the stallion's footsteps filled the spaces. As time passed, the memory of the storm became less frightening and more meaningful. It marked the night the past stopped chasing them. It reminded the farmer that broken things could still find new purpose, and that healing often came from places no one expected. The stallion had been labeled useless at the auction, just as the farmer had begun to feel useless in his own life. Yet together they discovered strength neither knew they still had. The farm thrived again. The farmer found comfort in waking before sunrise, knowing the stallion would be waiting by the fence. The neighbors often paused by the road to admire the horse, saying they had never seen an animal change so much. The farmer simply smiled, knowing the real change had also happened quietly inside him, in the long days and long nights that taught him how to trust again. In the end, the useless stallion became the farmer's greatest chance at rebuilding his life. And without even trying, the stallion gave the farmer something he thought he had lost forever: hope.